All right, y'all. So let's talk about The Nun 2. The Nun is back, and this is the third film that Michael Chavez has directed for the Conjuring universe. Well, second, because they're saying now La Llorona was not part of that, even though we all vividly remember them saying it, but apparently it was a slip up. So, whatever they want to do, gaslight us, it's fine. Let's talk about The Nun 2, though, and what exactly this will mean for The Conjuring 4, because there are some connections that are happening in this movie that are going to ultimately set up that final movie in the Conjuring universe, we believe. So let's get into it. Before we do, want to remind you to go ahead and subscribe, hit that notification bell. We are on the road to 30,000 subscribers, less than 2,000 to go for that. So we're trying to get to that. Can we get to that before spooky season? We do have a lot of things planned for these next coming weeks. So definitely stay tuned for all of those plans. But let's get into The Nun 2. So in The Nun 2, we see Thaisa Farmiga's character of Sister Irene return. We have a new nun as well here who is played by Storm Reed called Deborah. We see Maurice Frenchy return, who is played by Jonas Bouquet, and we have a nun coming back, which of course is played by the amazing Bonnie Aarons. But let's talk about exactly what happens in this movie. So 4 years after the events of the first Nun movie, which was one of the highest grossing movies, which was insane, and The Nun 2 is already on its way to becoming a pretty good box office return as well, because I think it grossed like 85 or 90 million dollars on a budget of 30 to 35 million. So pretty much made its budget 3 times already. So no way they're not making a Nun 3, right? So we do know that in this movie, it's been 4 years since the events of the previous Nun movie, and we see that now the Sister Irene and Frenchie are in different parts of Europe, and they're just living their life, and that's until the nun returns. And we know the nun is killing these sacred people, and the reason we find out during the movie is because they might just be the descendants of Saint Lucy, and that's what the nun is after, the eyes of Saint Lucy, which will give them the power to... We don't know. We don't know yet. We might get that answer pretty soon, but just give him a lot more power. Ultimately, we see Sister Irene and Sister Deborah go to try and track down the eyes of St. Lucy, find Frenchie, who does have the nun inside of them, and that's the reason that the nun is able to get around. And that happened in the previous movie when Frenchie went to save Sister Irene. We saw that the nun ultimately went into Frenchie, and that's the way they're keeping their selves alive as well. So ultimately, we see that St. Lucy was martyred by pagans, and the reason was that they ultimately set her on fire, gouged their eyes out. We saw that St. Lucy wasn't burned, and we saw that there was this whole thing where the eyes became this sort of powerful vessel, miracle type of weapon. And now this is what the nun is after. They find out that this was in a former monastery, and then it's ultimately the boarding school where Frenchie is now. So the nun is pretty close to the eyes of St. Lucy. So we see Sister Deborah and Sister Irene try to go forward and try to find these. And ultimately, they do find Maurice, they do find the nun, they find the eyes of St. Lucy, and a battle ensues. And let me tell you, this one felt like very much so a comic book movie at times, because we even see at a point that the nun does gain the eyes of St. Lucy, and they become like this super nun that is just insane to look at. And I was just like, what? Like, this was just incredible that the nun became this huge thing that was just there, and Sister Irene was set on fire by the nun. But then we find out Sister Irene is a descendant of Saint Lucy, so she didn't burn. And we see that there is somebody else who is a descendant of Saint Lucy in the Conjuring universe. And a quick glimpse in, like, blink and you'll miss it, we see Vera Farmiga's character of Lorraine is also a descendant of St. Lucy. So that could be a reason that we see the nun is trying to also kill Lorraine at points in the Conjuring universe, and could definitely set up a connection for the Conjuring 4, which we'll talk about in a bit. But the nun is now powerful. They have the eyes of St. Lucy. How will they ever be taken down? Well, Sister Irene and Sister Deborah see that where they are fighting the nun is full of wine, and wine is pouring everywhere. In the earlier part of the film, they have a talk about how the communion, there is this whole like faith that the blood is actually the wine. So the wine you're drinking during communion is the blood of Christ, as they say, but that only happens if you have this faith. And so they say, we have to pray, and they pray, and ultimately that wine does turn into the blood of Christ, and we see that the nun is vanquished back to hell, Frenchie's back to normal, and the other girls who were being tormented by the devil himself, apparently, who is that goat that we see in the stained glass, has now vanished as well. And we see that Frenchie is now going to try and live a normal life, it seems, and hopefully he will. But we all know that this isn't the end of the Nun, because we see the Nun decades later in the Conjuring universe, in the Conjuring 2. So we're definitely going to be getting another part of the Nun pretty soon, whether that's in the next Conjuring movie or not, because according to many, that is the final movie that Ed and Lorraine, who are played by Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga, will be in. So it's very interesting to me to see that they finally have this connection, where we see that Sister Irene and Lorraine come from like the same family, which is kind of funny because they're both sisters, Thaisa Farmiga and Vera Farmiga. So we could definitely see something where we're going to be seeing both of them show up in the next movie, maybe. I'm pretty curious about that, because I think that if we're playing it by the ages, they might just be around the same age by the time that comes. And so I wonder how that's going to be, right? Because I think that Irene could be probably in her 50s or 60s. And, you know, it's just interesting to me to see how that's all going to play out. Because a lot of people thought that Sister Irene was actually Lorraine and they were going to make that a whole thing. But I guess it's not. Could they be sisters in this as well? You know, it's interesting. I'm very curious to see what that's going to be. There's been this rumor floating around too that they want Patrick Wilson to direct that one, and you know, I'm open for that. We'll see what happens. But overall, I think this one definitely umped up the antics in the good way for me, especially compared to the first Nun. And I enjoyed seeing some of these special effects and scenes here. There's some very cool imagery as well, especially in that final battle. I really like how they went over the top and are really saying blockbuster horror. So definitely interested to see where they want to go with the Conjuring 4, since that's going to be like basically our end game movie. So we'll see what happens. Let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. Do you think they're going to split it into parts like they always do, like part 1 and part 2? I definitely see that coming for sure. But anyways, thoughts on the Nun? Did you like it? Did you not? What do you think about the ending? What do you think about this theory of Thaisa and Vera Farmiga actually being sisters as well? We'll definitely talk about that. I could definitely see a thing where maybe like Vera Farmiga's character of Lorraine is going up against the Nun in a part of the 4th movie, and they're kind of like getting weaker as they're trying to bring it down, and out of nowhere, out of the shadows, you see Sister Irene pull up with the rosary and just take down the Nun. Could be a possibility, could not, but let me know what you think in the comments down below. And as always, that's going to do it for me. Like I said, make sure you subscribe, turn that notification bell on so you know when videos drop. We got a ton of things coming. Follow us on our other social medias, and I'll see all of you next time. Stay safe and stay positive, y'all.